Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to be talking about the Serpent situation. Surprise, surprise, because 2 full days have passed and well, there is zero input from Kabam in any official capacity. The thread has reached about 8.2k views on Kabam forums and it has like 10 pages of discussion. Yet zero replies from Kabam staff as well, even though that they might be reconsidering, they're looking at the situation, or any sort of acknowledgement about the situation in the first place. And this video is going to be geared towards the arguments that we are hearing about why Serpent perhaps shouldn't be nerfed, but perhaps he's perfectly okay, and kind of going up against that, as well as pointing out a few other things that have become blatantly obvious with the Serpent situation, the balancing program in general. First and foremost, before we get any further in the video, I do want to point out that everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I am entitled to disagree with anybody's opinion. It doesn't make me dislike the person, doesn't make me think of them more or less necessarily. As a good example is, I had somebody in the morning stream heavily advocating for Serpent remaining as he is, saying that he's perfectly fine, and we had, fairly civilized, well, not fairly, we had perfectly fine civilized discussion. There was absolutely no ill will from me towards that person, and I hope the same goes other way around. Point being is that regardless of whether you think Serpent should or should not be nerfed, even though the vast majority of the player base, according to every single poll made by anyone ever, thinks that Serpent should be nerfed, you are free to play the devil's advocate, you are free to advocate for the minority position, and that is perfectly fair. Just like I am free to go over the arguments that have been presented to me by the people who think Serpent's perfectly fine. And the first thing that we are going to be discussing is the Hercules situation, or the overpowered attacker situation, where people are using mistakenly champions to say that, like, look, Juggernaut is the same thing as Serpent, just offensively, and we are fine with that. Or like Hercules is the same thing as Serpent on offensively, and we are perfectly fine with that. There are, well, several differences that we are going to break down slowly. But effectively, the argument is that Hercules is busted offensively, Serpent is busted defensively, therefore they are exactly the same thing, just the different sides of the coin. And first and foremost, need I remind anyone that Hercules is literally the reason that the balancing program exists. Right? As in, balancing program is largely made to prevent another Hercules, which it's failing to do right now. So if anybody is using an argument that we have an overpowered attacker in the game right now, so if we want the defender to be nerfed, we should want the attacker to be nerfed as well, then the first argument right here, right now, is that that's what balancing program is supposed to make sure happens. Right? That's why the balancing program was made in the first place. So if something is overpowered in the game, it should be tuned down. So anybody who says anything about overpowered attackers and needing them nerfed immediately lose the argument, because they are the entire reason the balancing exists, and Serpent should have been balanced as per their own argument. That is first point there. Second point there is why community is obviously fine with stronger attackers than they can tolerate defenders. The first and the biggest reason is because no attacker can be used everywhere all the time. Kabam will specifically design content, new champions, and new metas so that these attackers don't work. For instance, in arena format, you can use Juggernaut to destroy vast majority of the champions in the game and do it incredibly fast and efficient. It is also a fact that Juggernaut doesn't work half the seasons that exist because the nodes prevent him to. You just need to put on any debuff on Juggernaut for any reason and he doesn't work. Similarly, for instance, Hercules, he's far from an amazing, insane, overpowered Battlegrounds attacker because half of the metas punish buffs and buff heavy champions like the current one, and Hercules becomes unusable. So whilst an overpowered defender, we can't escape it from. If Kabam releases an overpowered defender, it's a must-have champion in this situation for any competitive play like Battlegrounds, like Alliance Wars, because it's always going to go in the deck and you're going to face it in just about every meta, just about every match. Strong attackers will work sometimes against some champions. That's the big difference. You get significantly less use out of offensive champions than you do out of overpowered defensive champions. And therefore, those two things are not like one another at all. Unless Kabam makes an attacker that completely ignores all the nodes, all the abilities, and KOs everything, then it's just never going to be the same. So those are the two big points of argument. The third point of argument is the burden of loss, the burden of inconvenience, of let's just say the burden of this champion existing. Obviously, players want less burden for themselves. They want easier time, less resource cost, less monetary cost, and if an attacker is causing a problem, then whilst Kabam is going to get it tuned down, get it balanced, going to design metas around it, going to design new champions, the incurred cost is to Kabam. Players will use less nerves, less resources, and effectively will have an easier time for a while. And in case with Serpent, because that is the argument, there will be counters released to Serpent eventually. Over a year's time, Serpent's just going to be another champion, like Penny, like something that gets destroyed by these new set of champions. But that immediately creates a situation where, number one, everybody's going to be pretty much forced to get these new champions as quickly as possible if they want to play competitively in order to counter the Serpent. And that means arena grants, that means monetary cost, that means, getting the catalyst, that means acquiring the champions in the first place via the crystals or early access bundles, which is effectively often Kabam's plan to sell the solution. But previously, up until Serpent, there was a fair amount of solutions existing already, so that you didn't feel that you are forced to chase it. Serpent just makes this more of a have-not or do-have game. If you do not have Serpent, you're immediately at a massive disadvantage opposed to the players who do have, because they immediately have a win condition. So you're chasing the Serpent, and then afterwards you're going to be chasing whatever kills the Serpent. And this takes away the point of Battlegrounds, which is to reward part of the point of the Battlegrounds, which is to reward the skilled play. Because against Serpent, in vast majority of the matches, it doesn't matter how well or poorly you play. Only thing that matters is whether you have the right RPG counter to face Serpent. So not only it creates this have and have not situation to an extreme standard, it also denigrates any skillful or any skill importance from the game. Anyways, moving further, the argument just ban Serpent is the dumbest thing that I have ever heard, because the fact itself, if a champion is so problematic that it requires to be banned vast majority or all the time, that in itself, to me, shows that there is a problem. If a champion needs to be banned for the game to function normally, or for you to have a fair match, then that shows the problem. Then Kabam might as well just ban Serpent from Battlegrounds permanently and reduce the amount of bans players have available, for instance. Because that's not alright. That definitely indicates a problem. And I will bet you any money that Serpent is the most banned champion, and the champion will with likely the highest win percentage in Battlegrounds, for instance, and in Alliance War with the highest kill counts. And if that doesn't show a problem, I don't know what does. Right. Next argument that kind of was lifted from one of the content creators' videos, as well as in the morning discussion, that Serpent can be killed, so he's perfectly fine. And that, again, a very poor argument, because if a champion that wouldn't be killable at all ever, that would be beyond imaginable in a game like this. Of course you can kill Serpent. I have killed Serpent with random champions in separate metas, pending the circumstances, pending the AI. I sometimes use Werewolf by Night for Serpent if I have no better choice. Sometimes I have killed Serpent with Sasquatch or with CGR or with some other champions, but that can only happen in under very specific situations with the AI that works together with you, and if you get lucky. But the point is that just because you can kill Serpent with let's say, Wiccan in the previous meta, doesn't mean that Serpent is not busted, because half of these counters do not work most of the time, and Serpent is by far and away the most toxic and overtuned defender in the history of the game. The fact is that even using the perfect counter, you will most often lose a match involving Serpent just based on time attacks. If your opponent has a mediocre, middle of the pack counter to whatever you are placing down, even if it's the second most BS defender, I would call Bullseye or something like Photon, and the opponent has half decent counter, or Onslaught and opponent has half decent counter, you will most of the time lose the match using the best counter for Serpent that exists in any current meta. Right now, maybe Chavez is the only exception to that, for instance, in the current victory track meta. But if you're going to be using just about anyone other than Chavez against Serpent, and the opponent is going to have a half-decent match, they're going to win. And that perfectly illustrates the impossible RNG task that is being asked of the players. We are asked to add in suboptimal pseudo-shit champions in our decks to counter Serpent, that at the end of the day, half the time, ends up being pointless, because even when we drop the counter to the Serpent, we still end up losing the match, because they're just not that good of a champions, or they're not as fast, or they do not counter Serpent well enough to do these fights at competitive times and speeds. And that, I am willing to bet, can be easily demonstrated by Serpent's win percentage. Like, if you drop, like, which champion delivers the most Ws when they are on defense, I'm willing to bet that Serpent in any given meta since Serpent has been released. Right. So I covered he can be killed, so it's okay. So I covered there will be counters, but of course. And the last point that I want to discuss in today's video is the blatant inconsistency of Kabam with the balancing program. In past, Kabam has balanced Absorbing Man because his region was too overpowered, because players got stuck on Absman, for instance. In recent past, Kabam has slightly tuned down Bullseye. And Bullseye is an annoying defender, and I thought he would get tuned down some more, but no. But they still tuned him down slightly. But neither one of these champions, for instance, is anywhere close to as big of a problem as Serpent is himself. Serpent's by far and away way worse defender, way more problematic, with way fewer counters, that's way tankier and harder to deal with than Bullseye or Absman. Both Absman can be nuked by a plethora of champions, and Bullseye can be nuked with significantly larger amount of champions than Serpent can. Not to mention the fact that Bullseye has way shittier all the base stats, including health pool, so the fight generically is faster. The Serpent has better stats, more annoying abilities, fewer counters, but somehow is fine. Somehow we do not need to balance the Serpent. And I can't help but think it might have to do something with the personalities involved. Lastly, before anybody goes into, again, any personal attacks, one way or another, I want to, again, reiterate that this video is not a personal attack on anybody. Not the person designing the Serpent, not the person in charge of the balancing program, not the people who disagree with the opinion. Fact of the matter is, if I worked for Apple, and Apple paid my living, and I designed the new iPhone, and everybody thought the new iPhone was shit, I couldn't crap on the iPhone because of my job in any public manner. That's understandable, because I wouldn't want to risk my living. And if my best mate came to defend me, that would also be understandable. That would be a good, reasonable, nice thing to do. It doesn't mean that they would be right with what they're saying. They would have good reasons to say what they're saying. I'm not saying that's the case here. But life puts us in different situations, and we all do what we believe is best. And therefore, I do think that the same applies to the people who are involved in creating, balancing Serpent, or expressing any public opinions in support of Serpent remaining the same. I think they're wrong. I think Serpent should absolutely 100% get tuned down. I don't necessarily have any negative emotions towards anybody saying, that I'm wrong or saying the contrary things to me. So, let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about